Have you ever seen a creature that just couldn't possibly be real? Maybe as the night fell, you once saw a grotesquely tall, gangly, lumbering creature with burning eyes heading straight for you. But it turned out to be a lamp overgrown with vines. Whew! No. Just me? Well, you can see how our ancestors thought they saw impossible creatures like dragons, unicorns, or Bigfoot. But what if I told you these creatures actually existed once? So, come with me as we uncover the real beasts that inspired these legends, and some that have even been caught on camera. Eye for an eye. Over 2,000 years ago, the Greek poet Homer no, not him, this guy, wrote the Odyssey, which follows the adventures of Odysseus. Among his exploits was his arrival on an island populated by a terrifying race of one-eyed, man-eating giants known as Cyclopses. Well, aren't they a sight for sore eyes? Or eye. Odysseus and his crew were held captive by the Cyclops, Polyphemus, until they escaped with a bit of trickery and, eye gouging. Sure, the Odyssey is a cool myth, but is there any evidence that these cyclopic giants existed in real life? Well, along the Mediterranean islands, people have actually discovered the skulls of huge one-eyed monsters, which seem to back up the myth. But testing revealed that these skulls actually belonged to dwarf elephants, distant relatives of modern elephants that roamed the Mediterranean long before the arrival of humans until their extinction around 400,000 years ago. An adult grew to about 3 feet tall, no bigger than an African elephant calf, while their own calves were the size of puppies. They sound adorable. How could they have inspired the beastly Cyclops? Well, in the center of an elephant's skull lies the nasal passage, where the animal's trunk would have been. Over time, this would rot away, leaving behind a hollow cavity. Before the 4th century, most Greeks had never encountered elephants, so if they stumbled upon these fossils, they could have mistaken the hole for an eye socket, leading them to believe it came from a cyclops. With all the other extraordinary things the Greeks believed in, like Medusa, the Minotaur, or Cerberus, I don't think they'd have batted an eye at the existence of cyclopses. Unicornucopia. The unicorn is a mystical, legendary beast, but it wasn't always the beautiful horned horse that we use in emojis or put on lattes today. The first mention in Western literature of this creature comes from the Greek physician Ctesias in the 4th century BCE. He relayed stories from Indian travelers of a large, pale, blue-eyed donkey with a crimson head and 3 horns of white, red, and black. Ctesias' animal could well be the original unicorn, or, Satan, though it seems that this creature was actually a descriptive combination of large herbivores such as the Chiro, Kiang, and Indian rhino. In 77 AD, Roman author Pliny the Elder gave his own description of the unicorn, a ferocious, one-horned beast impossible to capture alive, though he was probably describing the Indian rhino. So the radiant unicorn was partly inspired by big, smelly rhinos? Well, in the 3rd century BC, scholars translating the Hebrew Bible to Greek mixed up re'em with monokeros, meaning one horn, previously used for rhinos. Before they knew it, this became unicornus in Latin and unicorn in English, leading the creature to become a symbol of purity and Jesus Christ. As for that swirled horn, this came about during the Middle Ages, when sailors and merchants peddled spiraled horns to European markets, claiming they were taken from slayed unicorns. People believed these possessed mystical powers, such as the ability to purify water and heal the sick. In reality, these were the tusks of narwhals, an Arctic whale species with an enlarged tooth that grows around 6 to 9 feet long from the animal's head. Royalty and aristocrats, unaware narwhals even existed, eagerly purchased the tusks. In fact, you can see the throne of Denmark, constructed in 1660, is made with exposed unicorn horn. What a whale of a scam. Owls and moths and men, oh my. Back in 1976, the Melling family went on an Easter vacation to Cornwall, England. It was a trip to remember, for all the wrong reasons. They were staying in the village of Monaghan, and their two girls were playing near the local church. Suddenly, they heard a noise coming from above, and when they looked up, they saw a horrific, twisted shape hovering over the church's tower. It was a dark, feathered creature, the same size as a man, but with outstretched wings and giant eyes that were far too big for any man's head. The girls fled, and severely shaken, they told their father, who in turn recounted the incident to total sage Tony Doc Shields. After this, more people were said to be terrorized by the Cornish creature coined the Owl Man across the late 70s and 80s, and each told their stories to Doc, who wrote and inspired books based on Owl Man. Now, its legend haunts the south of England. But over the pond in a small village called Point Pleasant in West Virginia, USA, a similar freak can be found in local folklore. Point Pleasant was a TNT area, somewhere factories that produced explosives for World War II. After the war, TNT was still being stored on site, supposedly polluting the surrounding environment. This led locals to speculate about what sort of effects it might have on the wildlife. When, in 1966, two couples came running out of the woods, claiming they'd seen something monstrous. A humanoid figure with 10-foot wings and gigantic glowing red eyes. The Mothman. The local paper ran the story, which riled the entire town up to go hunting for it. This saw it pass from story to legend, with people claiming to this day that they've caught the creature on camera. So, what were they really? If these really were humanoid, then the wings would need to be able to generate as much upward lift as the humanoid's weight. So, if Owlman and Mothman were both 5.5 feet tall, say, then their wingspan would need to be about 22 feet. And that's a lot bigger than Mothman's 10-foot span. Perhaps what these people mistakenly saw was a large species of owl, like the Eurasian eagle owl. You see, the larger female of this species can measure up to about 30 inches long, with a wingspan of over 6 feet. Just one problem with that theory. The species isn't present in the UK or the US, but it's not unheard of for avian adventurers to get lost and arrive from mainland Europe. They could have also been large barn owls, which are hella creepy when they hiss like this. Owls aren't the only explanation, though. All of the Owlman stories came from people who spoke to Doc, or one of his acquaintances, and then vanished. For context, Doc is a self-proclaimed warlock famous for his tales. I couldn't find a single news report on the Owlman, so chances are he conjured up the whole thing. However, Mothman did have multiple newspapers run stories about the sightings, which included the names and addresses of the people who'd seen it. But this was at a time where UFO and alien fever had gripped the nation. Maybe their imaginations just got carried away? What do you think? Were these sightings of big birds or just tall tales? Let me know down in the comments. Your Kraken's showing. Of all the sea monsters lurking in the ocean depths, one of the most terrifying has to be the Kraken. The legend originates from the waters of Scandinavia, where seafarers would return home with tales of a gigantic monster as big as an island that preyed on unwary ships. Throughout the ages, the Kraken's appearance has varied from a formless blob to a giant crustacean. It was only in the 18th century that the image we have today, a giant squid or octopus with tree-sized tentacles, emerged. The inspiration for the giant squid-like kraken likely stemmed from sightings of, well, surprise, surprise, giant and colossal squids. These are massive cephalopods over 40 feet in length, and that's bigger than your average school bus. The colossal squid sticks to Antarctic waters, where giant squids are found nearly everywhere, bar polar and tropical regions. Here's one in 2015 that showed up in Toyama Bay, Japan. The giant squid tips the scales around a hefty 600 pounds, while the colossal squid dwarfs even that, weighing up to 1,100 pounds. which is about as heavy as a grizzly bear. Even as late as 2004, people have had kraken-like experiences firsthand. French sailors participating in the Jules Verne trophy race reported an encounter with a kraken-like squid. Crewman Olivier de Coursaulson recounted how the creature latched onto their vessel's hull, only releasing its grip when the ship came to a halt. There's only been about 250 sightings of giant squid ever recorded, mostly involving deceased specimens washed ashore. This is because they live at depths of some 3,280 feet, and there's been even fewer sightings of the colossal squid, which live at depths as low as 6,560 feet. Live encounters with these animals are very rare, though after hearing stories of krakens attacking crews, maybe that's a good thing. Gruff griffins. A legend from the 5th century BC tells of the Greek historian Herodotus embarking on a journey towards Central Asia. As he crossed the Gobi Desert in Mongolia, he encountered the Scythians, nomadic people who shared tales of fierce creatures with beaks and 4 legs, guarding caves brimming with gold and protecting their young. Those creatures sound just like griffins. Wild beasts with the head, front legs, and occasionally wings of an eagle, coupled with the hindquarters of a lion. Man, those things really would make one heck of a guard dog. No wait, guard bird cat. Coincidentally, the Gobi Desert boasts one of the richest fossil deposits in the world, which is where the remains of the Protoceratops can be found. The dinosaur lived 80 million years ago during the late Cretaceous period and was an ancestor of the more famous Triceratops. This herbivorous creature measured 6 feet long and weighed 400 pounds, so about the same size as a very large wild boar. Classical folklorist Adrian Mayer hypothesized that the Scythians, while mining for gold, may have unearthed Protoceratops remains, sparking the griffin myth. Both have beaked bird-like faces, yet walk on 4 legs like a mammal. But not everyone buys this. Beasts with falcon-like heads and lions' bodies appeared in motifs from ancient Egypt as early as the 2nd millennium BC, around 2,000 years before Herodotus. It's much more likely that when Greeks started trading with the Middle East in the 8th century BC, they picked up new styles of art and religion. That's when mythical creatures like griffins were adopted into Greek culture. As for the Scythians, maybe they just told Herodotus the griffin story to stop him pinching their gold. See any serpents? Do you like snakes? Yeah? No? Well, what if you saw a sea snake over a mile long? Yeah, big no from me. Myths of gigantic sea snakes have spanned cultures worldwide, from the South Asian Naga gods to the Japanese Ryujin to the Norse Jormungandr. One of the most infamous sightings comes from the fishing town of Gloucester, Massachusetts in the U.S. Between 1817 and 19, reports of a strange creature, dubbed the Gloucester sea serpent, came flooding in. Descriptions varied wildly, but almost all reports referred to its immense size and snake-like head. Now, this might have been a basking shark. When viewed from a boat, these 40-feet-long fish slip through the water just like a serpent. It wouldn't be the first time that one of these Goliaths has been mistaken for a mystical creature. In 1808, the 55-foot-long carcass of a basking shark washed up on Stronsea in the Orkney Islands, Scotland. Its immense size led locals to believe it was the remains of a sea serpent. The basking shark isn't the only contender for this monstrous title, though. In January 1860, what was believed to be a sea serpent washed up on Hungry Bay in Bermuda and turned out to be an oarfish. They disturbingly lack scales and have red hair-like filaments growing along their bodies. The sea creature holds the title for the world's longest bony fish alive, measuring up to a gigantic 50 feet long. Although their elusive nature makes them difficult to study, as they tend to live between 65 and 650 feet below, only really breaching the water's surface when they're ill or are about to die. So, what do you think the Gloucester serpent was? A basking shark, an oarfish, or something else entirely? Let me know down below. All fired up. What mystical creature hoards mountains of gold, belches flames, and soars through the skies? You got it, the Western Dragon. Legends of these creatures have been with us since the late 2nd millennium BC in Mesopotamia, though these early dragons were depicted as being thinner and more snake-like. It was only in Europe after the 8th century that they evolved into winged, four-legged beasts. The fire-breathing likely came about when Christians associated dragons with Satan and hellfire. On the other side, you've got East Asian dragons. These serpentine creatures are wise, often associated with water, and are generally chill. So, what animal inspired these creatures? Man, it'd be easier to ask what animal didn't inspire them. Whenever early people found fossils left behind by gigantic animals, their imagination, understandably, conjured up terrifying monsters. Take, for instance, the city of Klagenfurt, Austria, where the town hall displayed a skull believed to be from a lindworm, a snakish dragon slain by a knight. To honor the legend, a statue was carved with the skull used as a reference. However, in the 1800s, zoologists discovered it was actually from a woolly rhino. So, rhinos were mistaken for unicorns and dragons. Well, that's surprising. What's more, in 16th century China, a medical guide created by a court physician described a medicine made from dragon bones, which were in reality fossils. However, these may have been from Dinocephalosaurus orientalis, a 16-foot-long aquatic reptile from the Triassic period, which, look at it. Its serpentine body looks unmistakably similar to that of traditional Chinese dragons, which have no wings and instead are fabled to swim through the air. Though it's not just fossils that stoke legends of this distinct-looking creature. In 2017, villagers in Zhangjiakou, in China's northern Hebei province, claimed to have found a 60-foot-long dragon skeleton. While it did resemble the fossil structure and had a number of locals convinced dragons walked among them, it was actually a movie prop, though the structure and scale of it was still impressive. Another more psychological theory is that dragons sprang from the human mind as a combination of all the predators our ancestors would have feared, such as big cats, snakes, crocodiles, and birds of prey. Hang on, if all the early dragons were depicted as large snake-like beings, it doesn't seem like a stretch to say they might have been inspired by, well, large snakes. Good research, me. For Fox's sake. If you're like me, you've fallen for that special someone, only for the love of your life to reveal they're actually a fox in disguise. Weirdly, it's a tale as old as time in East Asian folklore, where fox spirit myths thrive. Whether it be the Chinese Huli Jing, the Japanese Kisune, or the Korean Gumiho, all have stories telling of their shape-shifting powers as well as their ability to sport over 1,000 tails. The number of tails supposedly reflected the fox's age and status. The more tails, the older, wiser, and more powerful they were, with 9 being the most common. These myths often involve foxes taking on the guise of a beautiful woman. In China, when a fox woman seduced a man, she would feed off his yang energy, weakening the man and even killing him. Not all foxes were bad news. In Japan, some were messengers of Inari, a god of forest and land in the Shinto religion, and were depicted as pure white. Can you guess what animal inspired these foxes? No. Don't actually answer, that was a rhetorical question. There was no distinction between ordinary red foxes and paranormal ones. Apparently, everyday foxes were simply not old enough to possess supernatural powers. It was the animal's tendency to appear at twilight that contributed to them being seen as liminal beings, ones that existed within 2 worlds, the regular and the spirit. You know, I've been thinking about getting back on the dating scene. Maybe I should start hanging around the dumpster at night and wait for the foxy ladies. Capability drown. If you're ever frolicking in the rivers of Japan, locals will say you must watch out for the kappa. This is a goblin-like water spirit, about the same size as a child. It's covered in scales, has webbed hands, shaggy hair, and a depression at the top of its head filled with water, just like a bowl. Its behavior ranges from kind to mischievous to downright murderous. They even have a penchant for sucking the insides out of a person's, well, let's just say you don't want to bend over near them. Okay, this sounds too bizarre to be real, but some claim there's evidence this demon exists. In 2014, so-called mummified remains of the creature went on display at the Myakonojo Shimazu residence after it was supposedly shot on a riverbank in 1888. I'm not buying it. Either these remains are fake or they belong to an animal with similar appendages, like the giant Japanese salamander. This is the second largest salamander in the world, weighing up to 55 pounds and growing up to 5 feet long. That's the same as a 10-year-old child. Now, unlike kappas, salamanders avoid humans, and reports of them attacking people are rare. What they are aggressive towards is their prey. The way salamanders snap their heads as they chomp down on their catch may have startled onlookers, inspiring the mythical creature. But if you ask me, the kappa looks more like a really big frog, toad, or turtle. Maybe the myth was conjured up by parents to stop their children from getting too close to the water by making up a butt-sucking monster. Top-tier parenting there. Abra Chupacabra. Starting in the mid-1970s, farmers across Puerto Rico awoke to a gruesome scene. Their livestock had been slaughtered, their blood drained, and some even slit open. Witnesses reported a strange creature prowling in the dark, with sharp fangs and glowing eyes. The carnage grew and spread across Latin America and the southern U.S. throughout the 80s and 90s, where the culprit became known as El Chupacabra, the goat sucker. The most famous account comes from Madeline Tolentino in Canovanas, back in August 1995, who claimed she saw the monster roaming her street. She described it as being some 3 feet tall at the shoulder, with human hands, big eyes, no nose, and grayish skin that looked like wet leather covered in rough patches of hair. The sketches that came from the depiction were truly unhinged, leading some to believe the creature must have been from outer space or the result of a secret government experiment. But I'm afraid our old friend Buzzkill Man is here to rule this wild assumption. Chupacabra are likely just coyotes suffering from a severe skin condition called mange. This is when parasitic mites burrow under the host's skin, releasing eggs and waste, causing an inflammatory response from the immune system. The animal's fur begins to fall out, and the skin becomes covered in sores, giving it a scaly appearance. The condition is severely debilitating for canines, and infected coyotes are forced to prey on easy targets, such as livestock, in order to survive. Mangy canines might not be the only inspiration. Tolentino, along with other witnesses, said that the Chupacabra bore a resemblance to the alien villain in the sci-fi horror film Species, released that same year. Maybe Tolentino's overactive imagination exaggerated an infected coyote's spikiness, giving it an extraterrestrial appearance. Regardless of the reason, I'm happy knowing this thing is probably just a sick dog, and not a livestock-hungry space vampire. Mountain Men. Ape-humanoid hybrid myths have been proliferated all over the world, from the European wild man to the majestic Himalayan yeti. But the most famous of all has to be the North American Bigfoot, or Sasquatch, whose legend traces back to indigenous folklore. The word Sasquatch reportedly comes from the Canadian Stahelis Nation, who believed in the shape-shifting Saskets. Even today, people still claim they have proof that they exist in the wild. Just take a look at this peaceful car ride through Bashkortostan, Russia in 2016. Whoa. There's a Bigfoot in Russia too? Well, despite spooky phenomena like this, skeptics have dismissed stories of ape men as a load of hooey. However, in 1935, the discovery of an unusually large molar tooth in Hong Kong gave credence to Bigfoot believers. Since then, fossilized jaws and teeth of a gigantic prehistoric ape have been found in China, Vietnam, and India. They belonged to Gigantopithecus, a relative of the orangutan. This extinct ape lived about 12 to 8 million years ago, stood more than 10 feet tall, and weighed 1,200 pounds. Wait a minute. Mom? The animal lived in Asia some 12 to 8 million years ago, spending its days lumbering on all fours and feeding on vegetation. Cryptozoologists, people who search for legendary creatures whose existence isn't proven, have argued that the relatives of Gigantopithecus may still live in places where these ape men are reported, though other Bigfoot aficionados have dismissed these claims, arguing that Bigfoot is agile and two-legged rather than a 10-foot-tall orangutan. Man, the Bigfoot fan club has more complex politics than I ever imagined. Centaur of attention. Horse riding is hard. First, you have to get him out of the stables, strap all the gear onto him, then attempt to climb on and stay on. Wouldn't it be simpler if you were just attached to the horse? And that's where being a centaur comes in handy. These were a fabled race of creatures from Greek mythology, part human, part horse, that dwelled in the mountains of Thessaly and Arcadia. There are a few stories about how centaurs came into being. None of them are child-friendly. One version involves a character called Centaurus getting friendly with some mares, resulting in the centaur race. Over familiarity with animals aside, surely there weren't really half-human, half-horse beings galloping around. No. But they were possibly inspired by a real-life sight. Back in the early classical period, that's the time from 510 to 323 BC, people didn't ride horses. So, when Scythian horsemen, nomadic warriors from the east, came raiding, terrified Greeks might have mistaken the rider and horse as one creature. Similar effects happen when the horse-riding cultures come into contact with those who don't ride. When the Spanish conquistadors invaded Mexico, the indigenous Aztecs and Incas believed the animal and human to be a single creature. Now, that may not be the only reason for these manimals. Terracotta figures of humans with horse hindquarters were discovered in the Mycenaean city of Ugarit in modern-day Syria during the late Greek Bronze Age. The Greeks may have snagged this motif by interacting with other civilizations in the East, whether through war, trade, or travel. Sorry to be a nay-sayer. And we've come to the end of our tales. What was your favorite mythical creature? Let me know down in the comments below, and thanks for watching.